Great, thank you, Rob. So we had a question in the chat about temperature, and you touched upon that. It was really nice showing the average temperature of the soil in Ventura County during the year. So I guess it's both for Ron and Rob is how do you get around that if as Ron showed that nitrogen uptake in the avocado tree is really important in the winter months, but we have colder soils, then what strategies would be the right thing to do?
Well, I can go first and then Ron can chime in. I was surprised when I looked at that soil temperature graph, how warm it stays in Ventura County. So you can go to that website and figure out what it is. That comes from the CIMMYS, the weather stations of the university. So, you know, I trust that data, but in the winter, it really doesn't get that cold in the soil surface. So in that 0 to 4 inches where many of the active roots are, there's a lot of activity still going on. Certainly it's going to be slower during the winter than during the summer, but you're still getting nutrient uptake, you're still getting water uptake, and things are still happening. So don't just assume that the trees have gone to sleep like they would be in a more cold climate. So they're still needing some attention.
Yeah,
Ron, do you have?
I totally agree. Bob, I think actually in a way, I don't know if he noticed that he completed a missing part in my talk. 'Cause when we tested wintertime nitrogen application, we saw that the ammonium was actually a bit less efficient than the mixture of urea ammonium nitrate, which has the highest yield. And that was against our hypothesis. And now Rob showed that the avocado has a preference for nitrate. And what we suggest to farmers now is just split it to 4 pieces. So it's every 3 weeks or so to supply a dose of nitrogen. And apparently it should be nitrate or mostly nitrate. Although it can be easily leached, so that you should take care and not supply a lot of nitrogen before heavy rains are expected. Yeah, temperature allowing root activity, and take into account that it's not only the upper 10 centimeters. The avocado roots goes much deeper. And nitrogen can be acquired from much deeper soil layer, of course, depending on your soil type and texture, and so on. But the avocado is originally from tropical area, and what we understand is that the highest demand for nitrogen and to some extent also phosphorus is just before flowering, where everything happens. You need a lot of nitrogen to produce these enormous inflorescences and the new growth, and then support the fruitlets. All happens in very short period of time. And before that happens, this is when you need the nitrogen.
Thanks. We have a question here. I think it's probably for Rob. Is there a good organic fertilizer that is soluble enough to go through irrigation lines?
Not that's affordable, really. You know, they can use blood type of things, but those are quite expensive. So generally, it's that's one of the limitations. There are some new things, and I guess this is sort of a contentious issue of what is going to be allowed for organic or or conventional farming. They decided they would allow a limited amount of sodium nitrate to be used for organic farming. I think it's 25% of the nitrogen load can be from sodium nitrate. And they said, well, it's not organic, but it's a natural occurring mineral and it's not processed. There's some other soluble nitrogen fertilizers like that that are being discussed now, including an ammonium nitrate fertilizer that's made from natural products. And they're trying to decide if it's from a natural product, does that mean this ammonium nitrate is organic? And so a lot of these debates are going on right now about what truly is an organic, but there may be some things in the future, but right now we don't have any great soluble nitrogen sources to go through
Thank you.
fertigation.
Good, and we had a question on the chat and Ron answered it, but I'll ask it again. Does high sodium contribute to chilling injury? And the only comment I'll make before Ron answers that is that many years ago, Gary Bender had a reclaimed water project and we did some post-harvest work on that. And there was definitely a correlation with the reclaimed water was very poor quality, very high in sodium and very high in chloride. And the storing that fruit even for 3 weeks was essentially a disaster compared to he had 3 rates, a clean water, a 50-50 blend, and then the reclaimed water, which was very low quality at that time. And it was clearly correlated. The storage capacity of the fruit was definitely correlated with the quality of the water and the health of the trees when he went out and looked at that. And I know that Gary is on at the meeting, so he might want to comment after Ron.
I think you covered it. Yeah. Of course, sodium has a negative impact on the tree performance in general and on the post-harvest quality. And what happens in Israel, for many years, we used low quality water, and mostly the damage was indirect. I mean, the soil texture was, or sodicity, this is what happened. And then soil infiltration rate, hydraulic conductivity, all diminished. And then we couldn't supply enough water, and the roots were lacking oxygen, and then nothing works anymore. And actually now we're desalinating our water. It's cheaper to remove the sodium before you apply it. It's much more difficult to do it after. Yeah.
Gary, do you have a comment?
Oh, well, you got it right, Mary Lou. I mean, that was kind of a disaster as far as fruit quality and the trees. We had, after I think it was 3 or 4 years of doing that, we really had to stop because I think we were about ready to kill the trees. And there was some earlier work done by somebody, I'm not sure who it was. They were looking at black streak disease in avocados, and they were correlating that with high sodium in the trunk. So there are some real negative effects on that.
That might have been Howard Orr, because he worked on
It could have
black
been, yeah, it could have been.
Yeah. We have one other question. What is the conversion into pounds of nitrogen per acre when spoon feeding 40 parts per million, which is the 40 milligrams per liter, in say 3 acre feet of water? So they calculate 39 pounds per acre. And he's asking, is he correct? And pretty close to 25 gallons of UN32 per season, of course, with better fertilizer efficiency. So that's maybe a Rob question.
I might have to do some math for a minute, but I can respond back on the chat. I'm looking to see where that was.
That's the very last one in the chat.
That's a question.
I must say about the experiment we are doing in substrate, you cannot take the numbers to the field. This is not correct. We irrigate in large axis, as I indicated, 30% drainage. This is hydroponic system. It cannot be used as is in the field. We have to take the trends that we see and then try to figure out what we are doing in the field and how we do that. The availability in the substrate is 100%. Of course, in the soil, it's not the case. The mobility is very high. In the soil, it's much more complex. It's different. The only thing we did is manipulate the availability and see what happens to the plants. And what I was trying to show is that low availability is bad, high availability is bad, and you need to find the optimum You cannot use the figures, the numbers that we did, because it wouldn't be right in the field. It's different. There's not so much leaching in the field and so on.
So we don't have any other questions, but I have a question. Neither one of you mentioned zinc. And zinc seems, you know, people have trouble getting zinc into the plant as well, and zinc can have great effects on both the tree and fruit. Can either of you comment on zinc? Ron, are you doing anything with zinc nutrition?
It's immature, but it seems like the avocado responds to everything. It's a spoiled tree. So iron, yes, we see larger trees when we supplied more iron than recommended. Same with zinc. And we have indication, again, it's too early to say. It might be even better for the fruit quality, but I suggest to wait a couple of years and to be more certain of that.
Mary, can I ask a
And
question?
seems like zinc is used almost universally for a lot of our crops in California. It always seems to benefit. I don't know specifically about avocados, but there's a number of chelates that are very successfully used either through the soil. There's a lot of foliar products that are very good. Again, the avocado leaf can be pretty challenging to get things in sometimes. And then there's coated granulars where they actually put a dusting of soluble zinc on a granule fertilizer. So if you're using a solid fertilizer program. So I think there's lots of options for that, Mary Lou.
Great. We John
Yeah,
would like
I'm
to
a
ask a
home
question.
grower. I have about 20 avocado trees, and one of my Fuertes has a calcium level of 0.6%. I'm just wondering how to supplement that safely. The zinc's also low in it. I don't know whether I should just add what to the soil. But normal should be 1 to 4%, I think. My calcium level is like 0.6 in the leaf analysis.
John, have you done any soil analysis yet?
Yeah, I did some soil
Okay.
analysis. It's super high in phosphorus. I don't have it in front of me. I could look it up in a couple
Yeah.
of minutes, but I'm doing both. I thought the leaf would give me a little more information. Because the soil samples are so random, they're so small, and I'm nervous. I really want to see what the tree is holding.
Right.
The
You
nitrogen analysis, that was 2.1%, so that was pretty good. Zinc was
It's
low, but on the leaf.
often you want to use the soil to make sure there's no underlying problems there, whether it's pH or salt or something that
My pH was 7.2, 7.5. I've had a lot of sulfur, and I've got it down to 6.8, somewhere under 7. So hopefully it gets more nutrients that way.
So calcium uptake occurs at the root tips. So it could be a root health issue, but also, there are plenty of soluble calcium fertilizers. That calcium nitrate that I mentioned could be an option to try that for your nitrogen fertilizer source for a while.
Thank you.
See if you can boost that up.
We have a question here. Are there any reliable methods of monitoring nitrogen availability in the soil during the season?
Well,
I can't really say. It's tricky, but what I've been learning from our experiments, look at your nitrogen availability at the end of the irrigation season. So in Israel, it will be October-ish, okay? If you over-fertilize, it accumulates. If you don't fertilize enough, you'll have low levels. But it's much more difficult than phosphorus and potassium because nitrogen, eventually everything will be converted to nitrate. And if you have rains or if you irrigate too much, it's leaching. It's difficult. But look at October. That's the only suggestion I can have.
Yeah, in terms of monitoring it during the season, it is really challenging. Like Ron said, we're working with new sensors. There's ways to actually suck out the soil solution using a porous ceramic cup under vacuum, or just taking soil samples directly. But is there any reliable way? We're often taking just a small little piece of the soil, like John mentioned, and then extrapolating over many acres or hectares. And so I'm not sure we're there for reliable yet. So I guess the answer is no.
Okay. Greg asked a question, but I'm not sure what it pertains to. Is anyone aware of other downsides? Is that for using wood chips? Because there was a comment in the chat about using wood chips.
I would say you got to be careful for the nitrogen negative period because microbes are going to suck all your nitrogen to break down that wood chips.
Yeah, and the closest analog I can think of that is where they're doing whole orchard recycling in the almond industry now. Before they would burn all the wood. And you can imagine in California, that wasn't very popular. So they just grind up those whole entire orchards and put that mulch right back onto the field. And again, there are some nitrogen problems, like you mentioned, Herman, but it's turning out surprisingly well. So there does take some additional management, but at least in the Central Valley where they were thinking, there's no way this is going to work. It's actually been quite successful and a good alternative when those orchards reach the end of their lifespan and it's time to do something else or replant another orchard. So I think there can be some good ways forward with that excessive wood chips, more than you would apply intentionally, but you're grinding up a whole orchard, you've got a lot of wood chips. So look into the whole orchard recycling for almonds for some guidance.
Yeah, I've heard about that, and that's a part of my impetus for asking the question.
It's good for water retention. We had a trial up in Ventura County that we started off with. It was a lemon orchard, and they just chipped it in place and spread it. And
that's the Lloyd Butler place, right? I remember.
The Lloyd Butler, and I mean the trees are over 10 years old now, and there's still remnants of those chips. But I think the trees were planted on high berms, and you could see during the summer that it really made a difference in the water retention in for the trees. It was on low volume that grove was on low volume sprinklers. So yeah.
Yeah, so everywhere I've seen chips used in a significant quantity, I've seen great results. So I'm just wondering if I'm missing anything. Has anyone seen any downsides other than just the difficulty of applying it in quantity, especially on hillsides?
Well, then the point here is of the Lloyd Butler trial. They didn't use it as a source of nitrogen. They were using it for other purposes. So they still had a fertilizer program. So
right, but yeah, so I've seen it is essentially long-term almost replace fertilizer applications where there's no more need for fertilizer applications long-term. It seems that, for example, in the almond orchard recycling, I think it was something like 17 years where those wood chips were still breaking down and supplying nutrients to the new trees. And yeah, so it seems to be a really more of a long-term vision of fertilizing rather than not just this year, but this month, how much, soluble nitrogen do I need to apply for right before flowering kind of thing, but more of like a long-term, like I'm sort of applying nutrients or fertility to the soil for the next decade kind of thing.
I think that's right, Greg. Yeah, and that's sort of our vision. If you can get that soil so it can supply those nutrients, organic matter is the best source of nutrients if you can make it work. But our soils are very low in organic matter. So that's why we're always supplementing them to help out that native resource. In those almond orchards, they've accumulated a huge amount of carbon and nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium in that wood over the 25 years of the orchard. And now you're releasing that after you've chipped it. So you're taking the advantage or the benefit of what's been done that previous 25 years. So you don't need as much for the second generation.
Great. I think we're at the end of time. We have one more question here that One person says, I've heard it said a lot of wood chips can make waterlogged soils after heavy rains worse. Any comments on that?
Yeah, well, I'll just say that is one downside that I have noticed in some places is where the wood chip's really thick and either you overwater or you get a ton of rain. There can be a little bit of a waterlogging, soggy soil issue in certain soils. That's one thing I've noticed. You've got to actually water less deliberately, you know.
Great, and then, well, now we got a couple more questions. What
Oh,
about
Rob,
soil?
I think you're on mute, Rob.
What about soil microbes that capture nitrogen? Is it being tried in corn where they have a high requirement for nitrogen? I don't know.
There's a lot of work that's being done on these biologicals. I don't know, they're thinking of using, there's symbiotic nitrogen fixation where for example, a legume where that fixing organism lives in the root. And then there's the asymbiotic where you're adding free living organisms. And a lot of interest in that concept. There was a report that was just released from the Midwest. I think there were about 8 or 10 different experiment stations that contributed, and they didn't find any consistent benefits from those yet. Doesn't mean it's not going to work, but we're still figuring out how to use them and where to use them. And I mean, if we can get that to work, that would be awesome to eliminate the need for nitrogen fertilizers on a regular basis. And also the amount they fix is generally in the 25 to 40 pounds per acre per year range. So it can supplement the mineral nutrition. I don't know that it's going to eliminate the need for nitrogen though. I don't think that's been tested on California orchards for sure yet.
Well,
Yeah,
great.
my experience is similar. You have bacteria that works in the lab, fix nitrogen. You go into the field, it doesn't work. For sure, it will go to the field crops and not to orchards. When it works in the field, open field, maybe it will also eventually arrive to orchards. It seems to be too early, but it's important to be aware that there are bacteria not only in legumes that fix nitrogen in our soils. We want to maintain it.
Which, of course, we don't have time today to talk about cover crops in young orchards. So I think we've reached, we're after 10 o'clock now. And I want to thank both our speakers and request that you send me a copy of your presentation or a PDF, 1 slide per page. And we'll have that posted on Avocado Source, and that'll be a companion to the video that will be on both Avocado Source and YouTube. And be watching out for an email from Lorena for when we can schedule both Tim Spann and Ben Faber together to give the 2 presentations that we're missing. So thank you very much. I hope thank you for your participation, and thank you to our speakers for giving such wonderful talks today.
Thank you, Mary Lou. Thank you.
Thank you.